Lily had always believed in the idea of a perfect family, a dream she and her husband Chris had built together over the years. Their life in a small town in North Carolina was far from extravagant, but it was full of love routine and a sense of security. She had never imagined a future where things would fall apart so quickly. With a 10-year-old son, Ethan, and a home they'd worked so hard to maintain, their world seemed stable until the day Chris walked in with a suitcase in hand, his face tense and avoiding her gaze. "I'm leaving Lily. I'm in love with someone else." The words hit her like a punch to the gut, leaving her speechless. Chris, her husband of 12 years, the father of their child, was walking out the door. Not just for another woman, but for a life she didn't understand. His mistress Tara had apparently swept him off his feet, and Lily was left alone with the remains of a marriage she thought was unbreakable. As Chris's voice trailed off, explaining how they could no longer live together, the reality of their financial situation hit Lily harder than the emotional blow. He had been the one who took care of the bills, the one who assured her everything would be fine. But as she glanced at their mounting bills, the empty credit card statements, and the house payments due, Lily realized Chris had left behind more than just his love. He had left her with a mountain of debt accumulated from loans in their names, all without her knowledge. It was a cold betrayal, one that would take more than just time to heal. Standing there in their empty living room, with nothing but the sound of her own racing heart, Lily realized that her world had just crumbled. She wasn't just dealing with the loss of her husband. She was facing a future with no clear direction and no money to guide her. Ethan, too, was confused. His wide eyes tried to make sense of the chaos that was suddenly their new reality, and Lily could see the pain in his young face. But she promised herself one thing: she would not let him suffer. Somehow, someway she would fix this. Little did she know, the solution to their crisis wasn't going to come from her. It was going to come from Ethan, a 10-year-old boy with more courage and resilience than she could have ever imagined. The day Chris left, it wasn't just the finality of his words that crushed Lily. It was the complete disregard for everything they had built together. He'd always been the one who reassured her during tough times, the one who held the family together, and now he was walking out without so much as a second glance. His confession felt surreal, as if the life they had shared for over a decade was just a string of lies. Lily still remembered their last conversation a few days before. Chris had seemed distracted, distant. Even he'd been working long hours on some vague project, claiming he needed to take care of some things that at the time Lily hadn't questioned. But now, the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the sudden lack of interest in spending time as a family. It all made sense now. Tara, his new girlfriend, had been there all along, waiting in the wings while Lily was busy trying to keep their family afloat. Chris's tone when he broke the news was oddly calm, almost too calm. "I'm in love with Tara," he had said, his eyes avoiding hers. "I didn't want this to happen, but I need to be honest with you." The words echoed in Lily's mind over and over, a cruel reminder of the man she thought she knew. What hurt most was not just his infidelity, but the fact that he was willing to leave their life behind without even a fight. No attempt to salvage their marriage, no apology. Just an exit, as if their years together meant nothing. Then came the shocking revelation. Chris had taken out loans in both their names, loans she had no idea existed. Their finances once, something they had discussed openly, had been secretly sinking into chaos. Chris had been borrowing money under the guise of investing in our future, but Lily had no idea that future didn't include her. He had signed off on the $40,000 to $1,000 loan for a new car, a luxury vehicle she never agreed to. The camper van they had been so excited about, also financed without her knowledge, and now all of that debt was in her name, a burden that she would have to face alone, as if betrayal weren't enough. Chris had left her to pick up the pieces of their financial mess while he walked away to a new life with Tara. The anger Lily felt was consuming. She wasn't just heartbroken, she was furious at the man who had vowed to protect her, to build a life with her. He had taken everything: their savings, their home, and now their future. She had spent sleepless nights wondering how she was going to make it all work. The reality of her situation began to set in. She was stuck with a mountain of debt, an uncertain future, and the painful aftermath of a betrayal that she had never seen coming. Yet, through all the chaos and the pain, one thing was clear. Lily wasn't going to let Chris's actions define her. She wasn't going to give up. She had to fight for Ethan, for herself, and for the life they deserved. But as she sat alone in their now empty house, the weight of the debt pressing down on her, she couldn't help but wonder, could she even recover from this? The days following Chris's departure felt like a blur of sleepless nights, mounting bills, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness. Lily tried her best to keep everything together, but the weight of the debt was suffocating. Every time she opened the mailbox, there was another notice overdue, payments, collections, letters, and the relentless pressure to pay what she simply couldn't afford. At first, she tried to tackle the problem head-on, carefully sorting through the pile of paperwork, hoping to find some kind of solution. But the more she tried to organize things, the more the financial mess seemed to spiral out of control. The loans Chris had secretly taken out, the car payments, the credit card bills. It was all like a puzzle she couldn't piece together. The life they had built together now felt like it was crumbling around her. Lily had always been the kind of person who prided herself on being strong, on handling whatever life threw her way. But this was different. This was a storm she had never prepared for, and it was threatening to tear apart everything she held dear. Her mind raced, constantly trying to figure out how she was going to make ends meet, how she was going to keep a roof over Ethan's head and food on the table. She didn't want her son to feel the weight of this crisis, but it was impossible to shield him from the stress and anxiety that seemed to fill every corner of their home. She could see the worry in his eyes, the way he asked about the bills, the way he asked if they would have to move into a smaller apartment. Lily didn't have the answers, and that was the hardest part. As the days passed, the pressure took a toll on Lily's physical health. She had always been a healthy person, someone who took pride in her fitness and well-being. But the stress of the financial crisis began to eat away at her. Her sleep became erratic. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, her mind racing with worry, only to fall back asleep hours later in a restless, uneasy slumber. Her appetite vanished, and she found herself skipping meals just to keep up with the constant paperwork. The weight was coming off, but not in a way that felt good. It was the kind of weight that made her feel weak, drained, and hopeless. She could feel her body shutting down, but she couldn't afford to stop. She had to keep going for Ethan, for her family. It wasn't long before Lily started experiencing chest pains, sharp and sudden, like a tightening in her chest, that left her gasping for breath. At first, she brushed it off as anxiety. After all, she had every reason to be anxious. But as the pain persisted, she finally made the decision to see a doctor. The diagnosis was a wake-up call. High blood pressure, a result of the extreme stress and lack of sleep. Her doctor told her that if she didn't start taking care of herself, things could escalate further. Lily couldn't believe it. She had been so focused on trying to survive the crisis that she had neglected her own health. The thought of leaving Ethan alone, of being too sick to care for him, terrified her more than anything else. But what could she do? There was no time to rest, no time to take a break. The bills kept coming, the debt didn't stop, and every day the pressure continued to mount. Her doctor's words echoed in her mind as she walked out of the clinic. You can't pour from an empty cup. She knew it was true, but how could she find the strength to take care of herself when everything else was falling apart? She had no choice but to keep going, but she also realized that she couldn't afford to ignore her health any longer. The weight of her responsibilities was overwhelming, but if she didn't find a way to balance it all, she might lose more than just her financial stability. The reality was clear. She couldn't handle this alone, but she had no choice but to try. The road ahead was uncertain, and the burden of debt combined with the toll it was taking on her health seemed almost too much to bear. But Lily wasn't one to back down from a challenge. With every setback, she found a little more resolve, a little more determination to keep fighting. Even when it felt like there was no way out, she kept pushing forward, doing whatever she could to keep herself and Ethan afloat. It was a typical afternoon when Ethan came up with an idea that would change everything. Lily was sitting at the kitchen table, papers scattered in front of her, the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. She'd spent the morning trying to negotiate with creditors, her voice cracking every time she explained how little she could afford to pay. Ethan was in the living room, quietly playing with his action figures, but his eyes were always on his mom. He could tell she was struggling, and he hated seeing her like that. He knew she was trying to protect him from the harsh reality of their situation, but the truth was clear to him. Things were bad, worse than bad. But Ethan was different from other kids his age. He didn't just see problems, he saw solutions, even if they were far beyond what anyone might expect from a 10-year-old. It started with a conversation that seemed simple. At first, Ethan had been listening to his mom's phone call with the bank, where she was explaining that they couldn't make another payment on their mortgage. The words were harsh, but he heard something else, a glimmer of hope in his mom's voice when she mentioned they might be able to sell the house. He didn't want to lose their home, but he also knew that the house wasn't the only thing that mattered. What if there was another way? What if they could find a way to fix this mess without giving up everything they had? That night after dinner, Ethan sat beside Lily on the couch, his small hands holding a piece of paper. "Mom," he said, his voice unusually serious for a boy his age, "I've been thinking about something." Lily looked down at him, tired but willing to listen. "What is it, honey?" Ethan hesitated for a moment before he continued. "You always say we can fix anything if we work together, right?" Lily nodded, confused, but encouraged him to keep going. "Yeah, I do believe that. I think I have a plan." Ethan set his eyes wide with determination. He pulled out the paper, revealing a sketch he'd made. It wasn't anything fancy, just a list of ideas, but it was clear that he'd put thought into it. "What if we turn our house into a small business?" he asked. "We could rent out the garage to people who need a place to work or store stuff, and we could do the same with the basement. We could even offer some space to a small group of people who need a place to park their cars. I saw some people do it on the internet." Lily stared at her son, stunned by his creativity. She had never expected him to come up with an idea like this, but as she looked over the plan, something stirred inside of her. Ethan wasn't just talking about making money. He was talking about taking control of the situation. He wasn't waiting for someone to save them. He was stepping up, just like she had always hoped he would. "But Ethan," she said, trying to process it all, "how do you know this will work? It's a big risk." Ethan shrugged, his expression filled with the kind of confidence that only a child could have. "I've read about it. People do it all the time, and we have space in the house that we're not using. Maybe we can fix it up a little, and then people will want to rent it. You said you've been looking for ways to make extra money, right?" Lily felt a mixture of pride and worry. She had been so consumed by the mounting pressure that she hadn't even considered alternatives like this. Ethan was right. They did have unused space in the house. Maybe this wasn't the perfect solution, but it was a start. And for the first time in weeks, Lily felt a spark of hope. She realized that even in the darkest of times, her son's ingenuity had given her a reason to keep fighting. "What do you think?" Ethan asked, his eyes bright with expectation. Lily looked down at the paper in her hands and smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "I think we have to give it a try," she said softly. "I think you might just be the one to save us after all." The next few days after Ethan shared his plan felt like a whirlwind. It wasn't just the stress of their financial situation that hung in the air. It was the determination in Ethan's eyes which gave Lily a sense of urgency she hadn't felt in months. Ethan's idea wasn't just a pipe dream, it was a real tangible possibility. And if there was any chance they could make it work, Lily knew she had to back him up. But where to start? Ethan was relentless. He didn't wait for anyone to tell him what to do. Instead, he dived headfirst into researching everything about renting out space. He spent hours online, reading articles, watching YouTube videos, and even emailing people who had done similar things. The kid was like a mini business mogul in the making. As he sat at the kitchen table one morning, with piles of paper and printouts scattered all over, Lily marveled at his dedication. He wasn't just coming up with ideas, he was researching how to turn them into reality. "Mom, look at this," Ethan said, pointing to a detailed document he had printed out. "I found a step-by-step guide for setting up a small rental business. We can start by clearing out the garage. It'll need some cleaning and maybe a fresh coat of paint. But once that's done, we can put up a listing on a few local websites. I've even found a few places where we can advertise it for free." Lily sat next to him, trying to keep up with the sheer volume of information he was processing. She felt a mix of awe and disbelief. How was it possible for a 10-year-old to have this much focus? But there was no time for doubts. With every new piece of research Ethan brought to her, a tiny flicker of hope burned brighter. The first step, Ethan decided, was to clean out the garage. It wasn't much, but it was the space they had to work with, and he was determined to make the best of it. They spent the next few days clearing out years' worth of junk that had accumulated in the garage. Ethan was more than just a helper. He was the leader of the operation. He took charge of organizing the piles, throwing away what was useless, and sorting through the things they could either donate or sell. Lily was amazed at how industrious her son had become. While she struggled with the overwhelming stress of their financial situation, Ethan had taken the reins, showing her that they could turn their situation around if they simply started by taking small, manageable steps. The cleanup wasn't easy. There were moments of frustration. Lily's hands ached from lifting heavy boxes, and Ethan got discouraged when a pile of old furniture seemed like it would never be cleared. But every time they hit a snag, Ethan would encourage her. "We're almost there, Mom. Just a little longer, and we'll have it ready." He'd say, his voice unwavering. His optimism was contagious, and Lily found herself pushing through, determined not to let him down. Once the garage was clean, they started working on making it presentable. Ethan had researched how to make the space more appealing to potential renters and suggested a few low-cost improvements. "We can buy some storage shelves to make it look neat. Maybe a rug to make it more inviting," he proposed. They set out to a local store and picked up a few inexpensive items to spruce up the space. Ethan insisted they could do a lot with just a little, and his vision started coming to life. By the end of the week, the garage looked completely different. It was clean, organized, and ready for business. The next step was creating the listings. Ethan had already found several websites where people in their area posted available spaces for rent. With Lily's help, he took pictures of the newly cleaned garage and wrote a short description about how the space could be used for storage, a workshop, or even a home office. He made sure the photos were bright and inviting, emphasizing the neatness and potential of the space. Lily was impressed with how quickly Ethan picked up the skills necessary for advertising. He didn't just stop at the websites, he also suggested they post on social media, asking friends and family to spread the word. Within a few days of posting, the first inquiry came through. A woman named Jessica, who had recently moved to the area, was looking for a place to store some extra furniture while she found a more permanent home. She wanted to stop by and check out the space. Ethan's heart raced when the email popped up on his mom's phone. This could be the beginning of their salvation. Lily was skeptical, but kept her doubts to herself. "Do you think this will actually work?" she asked Ethan quietly before the meeting. "I don't know, but I think we have a good chance." Ethan replied, his voice full of conviction. "People are looking for affordable options, and if we can give them a clean space with a good deal, we might just be able to make it work." The day Jessica came to view the garage, Ethan was the one to show her around. Lily stayed in the house, peeking out the window nervously as Ethan gave Jessica the grand tour. The meeting lasted for about 20 minutes. When Jessica left, Ethan came rushing inside, his eyes wide with excitement. She said, "She's interested. She'll sign the contract tomorrow," he exclaimed. Lily couldn't believe it. This was the break they needed, and it was all thanks to Ethan's initiative. The next day, Jessica signed a contract agreeing to rent the space for 6 months. It wasn't enough to solve all their financial problems, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, Lily felt like she could breathe again. It had been a few months since Ethan's initiative started turning their lives around. With the garage rented out and a steady income flowing in, Lily could finally breathe a little easier. Though the road ahead was still long, she felt a renewed sense of hope, but the weight of her past, the betrayal, the heartbreak still lingered heavily on her heart. Chris, her husband, had left her in a whirlwind of lies, and though she had come to terms with his departure, she couldn't shake the anger and resentment that simmered beneath the surface. Meanwhile, Chris and Tara were living their new life, and Lily couldn't help but wonder how they were coping with the consequences of their actions. While she focused on picking up the pieces, Chris seemed to be living in his own world, oblivious to the wreckage he'd left behind. Chris had always been the type to act without thinking, and that hadn't changed. He and Tara had moved in together shortly after his departure, and Lily heard through mutual friends that they were living in a small apartment, struggling financially in their own right. Tara, who had always seemed so sure of herself, when it came to taking what she wanted, was now finding that it wasn't as easy to get everything she wanted. They had no savings, no backup plan, just the fleeting illusion of freedom. In the months following Chris's sudden departure, things began to unravel for him. At first, he felt the excitement of starting fresh, of escaping his responsibilities and the life he had known. But that excitement began to fade quickly as the reality of his situation set in. Tara, though initially thrilled to be with him, started to show her true colors. She was impatient, demanding, and always wanting more. Her expectations grew higher, and Chris, with his limited resources and poor financial planning, found himself suffocating under the pressure. Chris had never been great with money, and without Lily's steady hand keeping things in check, he quickly fell behind on bills. Tara, who seemed to live for the present, didn't see the warning signs. She pushed Chris to keep up appearances to live a life that they couldn't afford. They went out to expensive restaurants, bought trendy clothes, and lived as though the world was at their feet. But as the bills piled up and the credit card debt mounted, Chris started to panic. Tara's carefree attitude began to grate on his nerves, but he didn't know how to tell her that they were sinking. One evening, after a particularly heated argument about their mounting debts, Tara stormed out of the apartment. Chris sat there staring at the unopened stack of overdue bills on the coffee table. He had no answers, no solutions. He was trapped. His decision to leave Lily had been rash, and now it felt like he was paying the price. But the consequences didn't stop there. Chris's work situation was deteriorating as well. His relationship with his boss had soured after he took an extended leave of absence to find himself leaving his colleagues to pick up the slack. His performance had suffered, and soon his boss made it clear that there was no room for someone who wasn't pulling their weight. Chris was laid off, and without the financial cushion he had relied on, things became even more dire. As Chris sank further into debt, Tara's patience grew thin. She began to blame him for their situation, accusing him of not being responsible enough. "You promised me a new life, Chris. But this isn't what I signed up for," she yelled one evening, throwing her hands up in frustration. Tara's once endearing confidence now seemed more like entitlement, and it was clear that the cracks in their relationship were becoming impossible to ignore. Chris, feeling cornered and defeated, finally reached out to Lily. It was a phone call he had dreaded making. His pride had kept him from asking for help, but now with nowhere else to turn, he had no choice. "Lily," he began, his voice filled with hesitation. I don't know what to do anymore. Things have gotten really bad, Tara, and we can't keep up with everything. I don't even know how I'm going to make rent this month." Lily was silent for a moment. Her mind raced with a mix of emotions, anger, disbelief, and something deeper she couldn't quite put into words. This man who had walked away from their family now had the nerve to ask for help, but the compassion in her heart, the same compassion that had kept her going through the toughest times, told her not to shut him out completely. "Chris," she said slowly, her voice steady but firm, "you left us. You chose to walk away. I don't know how many times I have to say this, but I can't fix this for you. You made your bed. You need to deal with the consequences." But even in the midst of her anger, Lily couldn't bring herself to hang up the phone. "You made your choices, Chris, but you're a father. You're still Ethan's dad. If you need help finding a job or getting back on your feet, you can ask. But don't expect me to save you. You're gonna have to fix this yourself." The conversation ended there, and Lily couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Chris's problems were no longer hers to fix. She had her own life, her own family to worry about. And if Chris was finally starting to feel the weight of his decisions, then maybe, just maybe that was the first step toward him, understanding the consequences of his betrayal. As for Tara, Lily knew that she would eventually face the music too. No one could live a life of deception and entitlement forever. Tara's self-centeredness and refusal to face reality would eventually catch up to her, just as it had caught up to Chris. In the end, no one was immune from the consequences of their choices. For Lily, the pain of betrayal had not only been emotional, but also financial. Yet with Ethan's help and her own perseverance, she was starting to see that there could be a brighter future ahead. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be theirs to rebuild. Meanwhile, Chris and Tara would have to face the fallout of their own actions, a long and difficult road that they had no choice but to walk. Lily sat on the porch of the small house she had rented just a few weeks ago, the cool evening air brushing against her face. It was quiet here, and for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. The past few months had been a whirlwind of emotional upheaval, financial strain, and unexpected challenges. But now she could finally see a glimmer of hope on the horizon. She looked over at Ethan, who was busy organizing the tools in the small garage they had turned into a makeshift workshop. He was becoming more confident by the day, and Lily couldn't help but smile at how far they had come. The fresh start was exactly what they needed, and although it had come at the expense of so much, her marriage, her security, her sense of control, Lily was starting to realize that maybe it was all worth it. In this small corner of the world, she and Ethan could rebuild, not just their finances, but their lives from the ground up. After Chris had left, Lily had been left to pick up the pieces, and she had done so with a strength she never knew she had. She had fought through sleepless nights, spent endless hours figuring out how to pay bills, and taken on the burden of not just being a mother, but also being a rock for Ethan when he needed her most. Through it all, she had tried to maintain her composure, even when her own world was crumbling around her. Now, with the business, Ethan had started running out of the garage, and a newfound sense of purpose, she could see that their sacrifices had paid off. They had both grown in ways that neither could have predicted, Ethan, at just 10 years old, had turned into a quiet problem solver, someone who wasn't afraid to take initiative. His business venture had been small at first, but with time, it had blossomed into something that provided them with more than just a steady income. It was a symbol of their resilience and the bond they shared as mother and son. Ethan had shown Lily that, even in the toughest times, there was always a way forward as long as they worked together. "I think we should take the rest of the night off," Lily said, standing up and brushing the dust off her jeans as she walked toward Ethan. "Let's grab dinner and maybe watch that movie you've been talking about." Ethan grinned, wiping his hands on a rag before tossing it aside. "Sounds perfect, Mom. I'll go start the popcorn." Lily watched him disappear inside her heart, swelling with pride. In just a short time, Ethan had become more than just her son. He was her partner, her confidant, and the one person who truly understood her. They had built something together, and though they still had a long way to go, the future suddenly seemed full of possibilities. That evening, as they sat together on the couch eating popcorn and watching an old family movie, Lily allowed herself to relax. For the first time in ages, she didn't feel the constant weight of anxiety pressing on her chest. There were still obstacles ahead. Of course, the debt wasn't gone, and there was no guarantee that Chris and Tara's downward spiral wouldn't affect them somehow. But Lily knew one thing for sure: no matter what happened, she and Ethan were going to be okay. The fresh start wasn't just about moving into a new house or starting a new business. It was about reclaiming her life, her sense of self-worth, and her ability to face whatever came next with courage. Chris had walked away, leaving her with nothing but a mountain of debt, but he had underestimated her strength. He had underestimated Ethan's resilience. The journey ahead would be difficult, but Lily was no longer afraid of the unknown. She had a partner in Ethan, and together they would face the challenges of tomorrow. The road to recovery was long, but they were on the right path. The house they had rented wasn't just a new place to live. It was the first step towards something better. They had made it through the storm, and now they were ready to rebuild their lives brick by brick. As the movie played on, Lily found herself smiling at Ethan, who had curled up beside her. It wasn't a grand life they were building, but it was theirs. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough.